you're an active pilot, sooner or later, your business or personal flying will bring you over mountainous terrain, and that'll require new pilot techniques and skills. There isn't anything special or unusual or mysterious about these. For the most part, it's just plain common sense and knowing how to handle your airplane at slow speeds and how to plan your flight so as to stay out of tight spots. And once learned, these skills provide a pilot with one of the greatest experiences flying has to offer. My name is Rocky Warren, and I've been flying this mountain country for 28 years. And one thing I've learned is a lot of respect for the mountains. In Colorado alone, there are 1,500 peaks, more than 10,000 feet high, and there are over 50 that reach 14,000 feet. And if nothing else, terrain like this can take an awful lot of learning and teach a man patience. Probably one of the most important things for the beginning or inexperienced pilot to do before entering the mountain area is to stop at the front range and get a check ride or a flight with an experienced pilot or flight instructor before entering.
How's it going?
Oh, okay. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Where are you headed?
Just gonna leave it out here.
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay.
Well, we're headed west.
Ever been over the mountains before?
No, I haven't. This is my first time.
Oh, yeah? Well, you might do yourself a favor by getting a mountain checkout from one of the instructors around here.
That's available here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sounds like a good idea.
Sure is.
Okay, everybody out? Okay, let's go on up to the terminal then. We're going to get over here and get a checkup.
That thing he was talking about?
What was that?
That checkup?
Yeah, that's a really good deal. Hello, Jerry McGuire, 8086 Quebec. We're planning a trip from Arapahoe, Granby, Kremling, Glenwood, Aspen, and then back to Denver, and back to Denver, please. And I'd like to have the winds aloft at the mountaintops.
Yeah. Okay, Jerry, let's shoot your plotter out and let's draw a line from Arapahoe County almost direct. I've been giving mountain flying courses for years, and I'm always delighted when someone stops and asks me for a little advice. A lot of times I think people are afraid to ask, but once they get through the barrier of asking, everything is just fine. The pilot and the experienced mountain pilot sit down and they can lay out the maps and really talk about it. We're going to have at least 14,000 to get over the pass. This is, will give us a cushion. Okay, we want to plan. The foothills start right about at the west side of Denver here. When planning a mountain flight, it's very important to use sectional charts. The best thing you can use is your dead reckoning and pilotage and knowing exactly where you are all the time. And I think that this is really important because in the mountains, you can get a mile off course and everything will look completely different and you can get completely lost. You can't always depend on navigational aids because a lot of times there's going to be mountain peaks between you and the navigational aid that run into the line of sight navigation. Flying in the mountains isn't tough. It's just like any other type of flying. You need experience in doing it. When I take pilots on a mountain flying course, the first leg that I usually plan is from Denver over Corona Pass to Granby. Corona Pass is one of the highest passes in Colorado, but it is also the best pass to go over where a pilot is only at 12 to 15,000 feet for a short time. If you plan a prolonged operation over 10,000 feet, it's really highly recommended that you use oxygen. The best way to minimize turbulence in the mountains is to get out and get an early start. Fly when it's either early in the morning before the cumulus start to build on the mountaintops, or late in the evening when the temperature has started to go down.
There's always weather in the mountains, and the principal weather hazards of flatland flying are the same as those in the mountains, including fogs and fronts and thunderstorms and squall lines and such. But probably the biggest difference is in the winds aloft and the wind traveling through the mountains at high speed. As the airflow passes over this rugged terrain, a lot of things happen. This can probably best be demonstrated by picturing a mountain stream or a river the water swirls and flows and causes unpredictable currents. Wind in the mountains can swirl and gust only much bigger and much higher. And the currents can go all directions, causing unpredictable crosswinds and downdrafts and updrafts where least expected.
I've taken a look over here to the left. If you can imagine a wind boiling over that baby, it'd be just like being on the bottom of Niagara Falls, only in air instead of in water. And that'll just churn things up until it's unbelievable. In fact, you can lose complete control of your airplane for periods of time. So you better stay out of here.
The thing we're talking about here is what's good weather and what's bad. Number one, visibility in the mountains is different than other places. Less than 30 miles visibility is poor visibility in the mountain country. And the big weather problem in mountains is wind and turbulence. The rule that I think is good and go by is if reporting stations are reporting winds aloft in excess of 30 knots at mountaintop level, 12 to 14,000 feet, then just simply don't go. Because that means winds over the mountains nearly double that, or 60 to 70 knots. And that'll create a turbulence condition and a flying condition that makes mountain flying extremely difficult.
It is quite common in the wintertime especially to have 100-knot winds or better at 12,000 feet. In the mountains we have the Venturi effect due to the fact that there's two large peaks on either side of a valley, so to speak, and as the wind comes in it is restricted as it goes between the peaks, and when it goes between the peaks the velocity increases. In some cases the airplane is completely uncontrollable and you cannot get across the mountain. The important thing is to stay away from abrupt changes of terrain, cliffs, rugged peaks, edges. If you have to go over rugged peaks, have the altitude before you start across.
However, we do have some wind up here. We're picking up light to moderate chop, 14,500 between.
The PIREPs, of course, are reports given by pilots while they're en route, generally over the radio. They are the most current weather report you can get because they are in the air at that time. So PIREPs are very important. However, the time I may be over the Continental Divide, it could be one thing. By the time the man leaves Denver and gets the Continental Divide, it could be completely obscured in IFR. I have seen times when I've departed Denver, it was clear, the divide was clear, there were a few high scattered clouds and so on and so forth, but there would be snow showers laying south, and by the time you get the divide would be completely obscured in IFR. And I've seen that happen in a matter of 7 minutes.
It becomes very evident to any pilot flying in the mountains, crossing high mountain terrain, that if there's going to be difficulty, it warns him way in advance. And if he continues, it's going to continue to get worse. If you're going to fly across a ridge, before you get to the area of the ridge, you're going to know that you're having updrafts and downdrafts and difficulty maintaining altitude and difficulty maintaining control of your airplane. If you're having so much difficulty before you get there, you'd better quit before you get there. If you're having no difficulty flying a normal flight path, you will have no difficulty crossing the ridge. It wouldn't be wise to try to fly across a ridge that you couldn't see the other side of. If you're flying across a ridge you can't see the other side of, you're not high enough to cross it. Don't fly up the middle of a canyon. Well, of course not, you know. Don't drive the wrong way on a freeway either. That's bad news too. And that's just about what this means on this flying up a canyon business. It's like the ridge crossing. If you don't know, you're already too late once you got in the canyon. Although the basic fundamental is, in any canyon, allow room to turn. Allow room to turn anytime. If you want to know if you're okay cut the throttle off and see if you have to turn before you can lose altitude. If you have to turn your airplane before you can lose altitude, you're in trouble. You must be able to turn at any time while losing altitude if you're flying in this country. So many people say, well, I can lose altitude, you know, right over there. Well, you're not there yet. What happens when you come down? Like, then you can't turn. The real problems of mountain flying have always been caused by a guy flying into a condition that he couldn't fly out of. It's not because the winds blew him into the mountain. It isn't because the turbulence pushed him into the mountain. It's because he flew into the mountain, because he couldn't do anything else. Airplanes on both sides of Monarch Pass are explicit evidence of the fact they couldn't do anything else.
Now this is the kind of country that people fly out here to see. The mountain country is spectacular in beauty. It's a wonderful thing to fly around and look at. Fascinating as all get out. But the pilot's got to remember not to get carried away with sightseeing, fly the airplane into a place he can't fly out of. You've got to keep your mind on what you're doing and watch where you're going. Really careful in this kind of country because you can get trapped in a hurry. Flying up one of these type canyons is a real dangerous thing. There's a lot of these canyons, there's only one way to go, and that is down and out the open end. It's a good idea to take a look at a tight box canyon before you go down it even. There can be wires and cables stretched across that you can't see. So you take a good look and then fly down and out the open end. That's the only way to go. A forced landing in a spot like this is going to give you very little time to select and make an approach to a spot that you can survive. So you've got to do it fast and you've got to do it right. And the best way is to have a spot in mind at all times when you're flying in this kind of country. Then when it does happen, you're ready for it. Any suitable spot with a normal approach means you can probably survive. But if you hit in a turn or you hit out of control, you probably will not survive.
We're trying to prevent people from having accidents in the first place, but assuming that we're not going to be 100% successful, there's got to be some way we can get the word out to people how important it is to pre-plan things, the pilot discipline that's necessary to survive in any kind of flying, but particularly in adverse flying conditions like the mountains. It's just like a good pre-flight or filing a flight plan. The pilots who use all the preventative measures that they have available to them are usually the last ones you ever have to go out and look for. One of the things that people that are not from this area don't realize is that it's easy to freeze to death in the middle of summer here at extreme altitude if you have to spend a night or two at 14,000 feet on any of the higher peaks. People should dress according to the terrain they're flying over and the conditions they're flying through rather than how good the heater is in the cabin of their airplane. At least if they're not dressed that way, they should have it very close to them so that they can reach it from their seat. Every experienced mountain pilot I know carries plenty of survival equipment on board their aircraft. Items such as the bedroll here and the space blankets, first aid equipment, survival equipment, smoke flares and very pistols, utility equipment such as knives, pair of pliers, survival rifle, a .22 rifle that floats with 200 rounds of ammunition, approximately 2 weeks of food, more utility equipment, banners, signaling banners, and so on. All right, all of this equipment will fit in this backpack. It weighs 34 pounds. The important thing to remember is, whether it's large or small, you need to carry survival equipment.
It's a real good idea when you're landing at an unfamiliar mountain airport to make a pass over the field, not only to take a look at the airport surface, but to check the terrain on both ends to see what you're faced with in case of a go-around. There are many mountain airports that there's only one way in and one way out, regardless of the wind, and you really want to know what you're going to be faced with. So a pass over the field, if you're unfamiliar, is a real good life insurance policy.
It's a common mistake when approaching a mountain airport to approach at too high an airspeed. Normal airspeed should be used, although that will result in a faster ground speed. The apparent speed will be much greater, but normal airspeed should be used. So come in at a normal high approach, reduce the power as you approach, use your flaps as needed, and keep that airspeed normal. We're approaching Gunnison Airport at the right angle, at the right speed, and this will result in a perfectly normal landing, however, at the higher ground speed. A low, long approach should be avoided at all costs. This is extremely dangerous, so make a normal approach, avoiding a long, low. Use the flaps as necessary, and you'll have a normal landing. Taking off from a high-altitude mountain airport doesn't require any special technique, but the initial rate of climb will be much lower, and your ground speed will be a lot faster. This requires a little special planning for immediately after takeoff to avoid something that you could hit easily that would be no problem at a lower altitude airport. The best rate of climb speed should be really carefully observed, even though that's going to result in a much greater ground speed. So a little planning on where you're going to go after takeoff is very important. Now here's a prime example of a mountain airport located in a narrow valley with mountains close in on both sides. Here's where you need to know how to make a short field landing in a gusty wind. And if you make an error in judgment on approaching this airport, the only correction is to go around and try it again. And while you're making the approach to an airport like this, you want to keep in mind looking out for other airplanes, because there might be some guy doing the same thing you are, only coming in from the other way. And there's no radar contact at this airport. I've been here at this particular airport when the windsock was blowing different directions on each end of this field. And the problem here is knowing how to handle the airplane at a slow speed in a gusty wind. Everybody can fly at cruising speed or faster. They can handle the airplane nicely on a 10,000-foot strip. But when it comes to a maximum performance short field landing in gusty air, as exemplified by this airport here, a little dual instruction from an experienced instructor on short field and slow flying techniques could be a lifesaver.
One of the big problems here in Aspen is density altitude. In fact, lack of knowledge of density altitude is probably the cause of more aircraft accidents in this area than any other single factor. We have a field elevation of 8,000 feet. In the summertime, our temperatures go up to perhaps 85 degrees in the middle of the day, and this will radically affect aircraft performance. The use of mixture control is very important, and you must lean out your engine, whether it's single or twin engine makes no difference, for takeoff in order to get optimum performance. Being a resort community, we get a lot of people in who live at low altitudes, and they just cannot believe how radically the airplane performance will be affected up here.
Density altitude is simply the altitude of the air at the airport, and this can be exceedingly high in hot temperatures, and that's where the airplane thinks it's flying. At 14,000 feet, no one expects an airplane to climb rapidly, or certainly not as rapidly as at sea level. Most pilots are familiar with their airplane performance at low altitudes, and this performance is changed at high altitudes in thin air. The biggest difference in this performance is the reduced rate of climb and angle of climb at high altitude airports. The high density altitude will reduce the airplane performance drastically. Should I take off downhill, downwind, or should I take off uphill, upwind? You can only take off downhill, because there's just no way that you can successfully take off uphill, upwind on a one-way strip. And here it's very important to point out that almost never is it the gradient or the length of the runway, it's the terrain immediately after takeoff that makes it so important. That is the real deciding factor. The wheels will leave the ground, and the airplane will climb at a normal rate of climb. But the terrain is what blocks the whole action at the upcountry side of the strip. Now then, how much of a downwind can you accept? I think the answer here is if you're nervous or apprehensive, just don't go.
We have a runway gradient here of nearly 2%. It's very significant and really affects an airplane's performance. Local pilots here never take off uphill, which would be taking off towards town. We do all our takeoffs to the north on runway 33, and we land on 15.
The biggest thing that any pilot has to learn is not to be afraid of flying in the mountains. Just learn how to do it and get rid of all that apprehension and fear. Ignorance is the thing that creates fear, and fear is the thing that creates accidents. The final killer in most accidents is panic, created by a whole series of events. You're going to have a lot better chance of making it, number one, if you're not overloaded, if you're in a good performing airplane, and your pilot technique is average or better, and if you've had some experience at it. Things are going to be a lot more rosy than if none of those others are true. Now, if somebody really wants to learn how to fly in the mountains, boy, I mean, they can sure learn how to do it. Because all they have to do is find somebody that knows how to do it better than they do. And they can learn. Everything's capsulized these days, and if I had to capsulize mountain flying, I'd start by saying, learn how to fly your airplane, particularly at slow speeds, and make short field landings in gusty winds. And learn good weather from bad. And stay out of the mountains when it's bad, fly when it's good, and it'll be no trouble, and you'll have a good time.